Welcome to another Britflicks.com podcast. My name's Stuart Wright, and today's guest is James Webber, a returning guest after 6 years wandering around, making other films. He's come back to us with his new film, Sorority. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you for having me on again.
My absolute pleasure. My absolute pleasure. Now, am I right in thinking this is your feature debut?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, this is the first one. Yeah.
Fantastic. Congratulations from all of us at Britflicks.
Thank you.
It's not easy getting a film made. It's not easy getting a film completed. So you've done all that now. And here we are with Sorority. So if you want to just for the listener who's thinking, can I see this film, or do I want to see this film? Do you want to give a brief synopsis as to what Sorority is about?
Yeah. So Sorority is it's an urban drama about two sisters. I guess you could call it a slice of life film. It charts a few days in the life of these two sisters as they kind of confront a rather tragic past and look ahead to a brighter future. I guess that's the film in a nutshell. It's kind of bittersweet. It's kind of funny. It's a bit sad. It's a bit of everything.
Yeah, it's a bit. It's that thing about and all through your adult life, your characters will learn that these are the chapters you keep coming up against. The idea of something ending and something beginning, but actually it's just a continuum. There's no cold cut away from where you was and where you're going to next. It's just, it's what's round the corner. And I think it's a lovely way of examining it through two people at very important crossroads that they don't really appreciate, do they? But they learn to through the decisions they're making in that moment.
I think sometimes, certainly when you're younger, those kind of changes do feel a little bit more finite. When you're older, you realize actually things just kind of continue, and you grow and you learn along the way. But I guess that's kind of what interested me in the film, and sort of like the idea of these two people have only ever had each other and then just find themselves at this particular time in life where one's going one way and one's going the other. I think when you've been in that quite sort of insular situation, it's a huge upheaval and it's quite scary. So it's interesting to sort of pull it apart and go into the details there, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if I can use myself as an example, which is a bit arrogant of me, but as one of your characters does get to make the leap into university from A-levels, that sort of chapter, you're talking to a graduate in estate management who's currently hosting a podcast and is a screenwriter. So whatever I thought I was going to be at 19, it never happened.
I think that's the same for most people. They always say the thing you go and study at university or college or whatever is quite often not the job you go on to do.
You wrote and directed this film.
Yeah, I did. Yeah,
and I should add actually at this point, there'll be links in the show notes as to how and where you can see the film, and that will change as things change with the film status. So keep your eye out for that. For those listening today, tomorrow, and 6 months in its future, and whenever else you pick this podcast up. So you writing this screenplay, what for you was the kernel of the idea that set you off on the path that became the film Sorority?
I think it kind of goes back to my childhood in some ways. I grew up in a house kind of surrounded by a lot of, women, all part of the same family. When I was a kid, I lived with my mother, my grandmother, and my great-grandmother, all under the same roof, in this little bungalow. I mean, I was talking to my mum about it the other day because it's a story, when you're sort of talking about the film, this story comes up. And I asked her, I was like, how do we all fit in this little bungalow? And we had this big debate because we couldn't remember where everyone was sleeping. It just was such a small place. But I sort of grew up around, close female family members, and you'd sort of watch those interactions, and, they were funny, complicated, occasionally, they annoy the hell out of you. It was just really funny, and to sort of seeing that generational interaction, I guess it's something that always kind of stayed with me and has kind of interested me as a filmmaker. And then oh God, a long time ago, I started writing. I guess it was the first, for what Sorority became. It was like a comedy about two sisters who had a terrible relationship. And then over time, it became more of a drama, and the relationship stopped becoming terrible and sort of became quite strong. And I sort of developed it and ended up doing a short film about it called Soror, which was must have been about 6 years ago now. Sort of based on the feature idea. And a lot of the people who went on to work on the feature were involved in that as well, like same cinematographer, Lorenzo Labrini, Kate Dickey's in the short film, as well as the feature, and a few other people as well. But it was quite an interesting way of sort of taking that idea and experimenting with it the good thing about short films is that you can experiment. You can try things out. You can see if things work, and if they don't work, then there's no real blowback. That's the wonderful thing about short films. So I had the feature idea for Sorority. I took elements of that to experiment, and in a short film, more shorter, contained version of the story, even though it's still nigh on 25 minutes long. It's like a third of the feature. And it was a really, really great experience because I got to try new things like working improv, actors like Kate Dickey and Sean Brecken and Rosie Day, who, all wonderful actors. And I learned a lot from that process. We also got to, I guess, find the visual style of the feature film before we made it.
Okay.
So many years later, when we actually made the feature, it was quite a simple process in some ways, like creatively, because we had already done so much work. We sort of jokingly referred to the short film as like our test footage that we shot many years before. And it was just a really helpful way to sort of go about the process, because there were also things, I felt that didn't work about the short, and I could jettison them and focus on the things that did work. If I hadn't have done the short film, I, wouldn't have had that previous knowledge. So it was very beneficial to the creative process.
So when you were expanding that short film idea out into a feature, was that always the plan, or was that a reaction from you to the short film and thinking, oh, it's got legs, this?
It was always the plan. In the back of my mind, I really wanted to make the feature film version. I wanted Soror to sort of stand on its own legs as well. But it was always sort of, my previous short film Driftwood was exactly the same. It was from a much larger feature film idea, and I just took elements from that I could sort of experiment with in a short form format. Which is quite it's quite a cool way of doing things.
What was your process then for taking what was obviously a self-contained screenplay that, like you say, run for 20 odd minutes, and then thinking, right, how do I get this into a sort of 80-90 minute feature film? What were the narrative threads that you could see there was potential for in the short that was obviously unexplored? And what were the challenges therein trying to bring those out into a feature film?
The weird thing is, I did it the other way around.
Oh, go on.
I had the feature film version, and then basically took the essence of it and made it into a short.
Okay.
Because usually it's sort of the other way around when features are based on shorts. I sort of did it the other way around, where although the drafts of the features then were very different than I think Sorority as a film now is much different than the Sorority that Soror was kind of, taken from back then. It evolved quite a bit in those years. But yeah, I guess you just sort of look at the large screenplay and sort of maybe there's some scenes that you feel are the kind of essence of the story, and you you take them and you put them down and you condense them. And I did want the short to stand on its own legs. So, the short film does things a little bit differently than the feature film does. And that's good because I think the characters are a little bit different as well, which, other than, Kate Dickie reprising her role, I think her character is quite different in the feature than in the short. And I think the sisters are quite different in the feature than they are in the short. Although they're still, incredibly close to each other, it's interesting. It's sort of evolved.
Is that because of what was on the page, or is that because the actors did something different in terms of their response to what was on the page?
It's a little bit of both. I always sort of see the script as a starting point. I'm not, the job of, I guess, a writer and director is, in some ways, you're like an editor. You're an editor on set, not an editor of imagery, but you're sort of an editor or a caretaker of the characters. I always like people to put their own stamp on their work, to bring their own ideas to the character. If they feel that there's a line that feels better or just feels right in the moment, more than what I've written, we'll talk about it. I don't necessarily always agree, but quite a lot of the time you cast the right people who really care about the character they're playing. You'd be stupid not to listen to it. And that was definitely the case on the feature. Like, I think some of them were a little bit shocked about how I was like, oh yeah, that's great. We'll do that. And they're like, oh, really? I was getting ready to sort of talk you into it. I was like, no, that's a brilliant idea. So I'm not, don't get me wrong. Sometimes I'll be like, I don't think that'll work. And we'll sort of talk about it and I'll explain my reasoning behind it. But quite a lot of the time, we were very lucky to have some amazing actors in Sorority, and you'd be sort of silly not to listen to that kind of fantastic advice.
Now, looking at the film, I can recognise, I think, a number of locations that I've been to around East London. I'm pretty sure. Am I right in thinking sort of Curtain Road, that kind of area around Shoreditch?
Yeah, we did shoot around there. I mean, pretty much, I'd say most of the film was shot in West London. Rather foolishly in my own house as well, which is the sister's house in the film. I say foolish because we repainted and did all the carpets just in time for a massive film crew to come through and traipse through the house. So yeah, I think we're still sort of working on the stains. But
so in that sense, I was going to say, so in that sense, then the West London element and the presence of the airport was very real as the story narration.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it was the same thing we did with the short, which was also filmed in my house. I didn't learn that time. And the planes going over, I was all, when you live in the flight path of Heathrow, you sort of get used to it a little bit. But I think sometimes it does have a bit of an effect. I think there's a moment in the film where, someone, Sophie Kennedy-Clarke's character remarks on, it can make you feel quite lonely with all those people traveling to different destinations over your head. I think the sound people would probably feel otherwise, but I thought it was a really interesting theme to have through the film. So I didn't mind plane noise in the film. I think it's sort of like it adds character to the location that we're trying to create.
I mean, you literally bring it to the fore at one stage, don't you? There's an argument between two characters, and the heat of the argument corresponds to the noise and volume of jet planes.
Well, that was quite interesting because that scene was shot in a continuous take. I think might be about 6 minutes long.
Okay,
and there was a lot of stuff sort of said that, it can't be done because a plane will come over and drown out the dialogue. We'll have to shoot just a series of, your standard shots to try and cut around. But I felt like we were establishing the planes quite early on in the film. I mean, there's lots of shots of the area and there's quite often a plane in the sky, or you hear it in the background. And I felt it added to the scene. It's quite a explosive argument on the street, and the plane noise adds to it. I felt it really sort of, it's almost like a pressure cooker. You hear it coming, and actually the beats of the scene where they get angry work perfectly with a plane coming in, and it really sort of creates a really cool mood. The funny thing is, as worried as the sound people were about it, and we actually had our post sound designer on set that day. He came down especially, probably to try and talk me out of it, but he listened in, and with him there, like I was like, can we work? We got the scene down. I was like, can we work with this? The funny thing is, we had to add plane noise to it in the end. The planes weren't loud enough. So I think there's an additional plane added at one point, and one of them was boosted up. So after all that sort of worry, we ended up sort of adding more and more to it. Anyway,
it's always the case, isn't it? What you want is never enough, and what you don't want is too much. I
think that's probably that's filmmaking in general, isn't it?
So just because what's fascinating me about the shots that are recognised as Shoreditch is, I wonder if you could speak to your experience of shooting at night in a place as busy and as lively as Shoreditch, because obviously you're trying to capture the idea of two people out celebrating, but obviously so's a lot of other normal people who aren't acting in films.
There's some interesting outtakes. So basically we had this alleyway, and it's in Shoreditch, beautiful graffiti, and it was always quite quiet, even at the weekend. So we shot a scene there of the two characters walking along, kind of happy, they're out to celebrate, taking a few swigs from a bottle of vodka, etc.
Yeah,
and then I was like, we were going back to unit base, which was in walking distance. I was like, well, we might as well just film them in character walking back to the unit base. So we did that. And of course, that meant walking past people coming out of the pub. And I think we were just like a herd of elephants behind, although it probably doesn't feel like it in the film. There's like a ton of people constantly running around behind the camera to try and not be in shot. And there was quite a few drunk people who were all of a sudden confronted with this full-on film crew coming straight at them, which was probably quite terrifying in their inebriated state. But it looked quite cool in the film, and it's very off the cuff, and I quite enjoy moments like that. Sort of gives the film like a very real feel.
I was going to say, I mean, that description of how you, even the decision, never mind the description of how you did it, but the decision to do it is a reflection of the energy you can feel in the shot. There's almost like there's a sense of what do you call it? There's the devil may care of the characters who obviously have got their exam results and can move on with what they're going to do next. But there's also that sort of, I guess, the subtextual stuff, which is that you and the rest of the crew are just trying to get this in the can at the same time, and that's fraught with the public who may just want to take interest in what you're doing.
You know what? I was really worried about filming that stuff. I mean, we did all our pre-production in Shoreditch. And we sort of set up in the diner, just kind of off of what's the main party street. It's the kind of place you always go early in the morning and have pancakes because you're hungover. But we would regularly kind of set up our laptops and be in that booth in the corner, and that was kind of our production office. And I love Shoreditch. It's such a fun, kind of vibrant place. There's all kinds of people, and a fair few amount of nutters as well, which I think is what makes it so appealing. But then the idea of sort of shooting there on the street on the fly as well, is a bit kind of scary. But we actually had no trouble at all. We had more trouble kind of probably in West London filming around our way. where I live. Shoreditch was kind of a dream. We shot the party scene. There's like a big party scene in the film, and that was all shot in Shoreditch as well, and a really cool property there. So yeah, it worked very well for our needs, and I'm glad that we were trying to keep location moves down to a minimum. Being completely based in West London for the most part was really great for production schedule, meant we could shoot a lot of stuff with very small unit moves. Sort of having to go all the way over to East London was, we were debating whether we could just recreate that locally, but I'm sort of glad that we sort of stuck to the guns there, and got a bit of Shoreditch in there.
Given it is your debut feature, what would you say? What would you speak to the experience that you've gained from it that you hadn't already gained from the short films you've made in the past? What level up have you done in your mind, having done this film now that you weren't at before you made it?
I think in some ways, I was surprised in some ways of how similar making a feature film is to a short film, or at least the way I had made short films. Mm-hmm. There's probably just as many locations in this film as I had in the short film version. There's pretty much just as many actors as well. So you're doing the same amount of work. You're just offering more money and doing it for a longer period of time, which was kind of a bit of a surprise at the time. I think the new stuff for me is obviously because I was more involved as a producer on this film.
Okay.
Because it is a micro budget film, and I felt that I was probably ready to sort of make that larger step up, having done a little bit of producing before in the past. I think it's just raising the finance, and we'd always done crowdfunding campaigns for a lot of our short films, and it's a little bit different when you get to a feature, mainly because you need a lot more money, and finding people. I mean, film financing is a minefield, which I think is no secret. I think it's plainly obvious for anyone that is probably the biggest challenge, raising enough money to make your film the way it needs to be made. We were quite lucky on this. It was quite straightforward. We found someone quite quickly. They committed to paying basically the entire budget.
Finally, a bed that senses snoring and automatically responds. Meet the Ergo Smart Base from Tempur-Pedic, our first system that detects snoring, then automatically adjusts by raising the bed. Get your best sleep, all night, every night. For a limited time, save up to $500 on select adjustable mattress sets and experience the deep, undisturbed sleep of Tempur-Pedic. Get full offer details at TempurPedic.com.
I had been in a few situations with other projects where you meet people who say things like that, and you don't get excited because they probably have no intention of doing it. They just like the feeling of saying that to someone, over an expensive meal or something, So I didn't get excited, but you know what? The guy stuck to his word and did actually fund the film. So it was quite a nice experience. I guess the biggest takeaway I'm getting from it is sort of the back end, distribution, things like that. It's stuff that I've had short films that have had distribution with people like Crypt TV or Shorts International, but it's a different ball game completely when you're talking features. So that's a process that I'm learning about and actually really enjoying. It's nice to sort of be exposed to sort of other areas of the filmmaking process that I haven't been before. And that's the great thing about making micro budget films. It tends to throw you in occasionally at the deep end in new experiences and new things to learn, made more so on the business side. So that's probably my biggest takeaway. Obviously, with COVID and everything. That's been pretty interesting. Luckily, we'd shot the film before the first lockdown was announced. We had the final cut, but we were doing like sound design and grade and the sound mix. So a lot of that had to be done remotely, which isn't a way I really like to work. I like to be in the room. I like to talk to people. I like it, it's nice. You get that sort of back and forth and that creative energy flowing. It's a bit difficult to do that over a Zoom call or by email. But we got there in the end. But that was definitely a challenge.
As out of interest, then, having gone through that experience and thinking that you obviously would prefer to be in the room, does having done it successfully open your eyes to doing that in the future? Because obviously, it must be less expensive to not have to have everybody in the room together. So there's a cost saving somewhere, isn't there? In a normal environment?
No, it's exactly the same cost, unfortunately.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, because if you're hiring a grading suite and the grader's grading, it doesn't matter if you're there or not. Like, he has to be there. In fact, it can cost more because it takes a little bit longer to get your ideas across, especially with grading. It's difficult to. You're talking large file sizes being transferred backwards and forwards. It slows the process down. And as we all know, like, the biggest thing is, time is money, and that's very true. And luckily, we were able to get in and do the sound mix in person in a facility, Halo Post in Soho, and they had a great system. Felt very safe. The mixing stage is big enough that there's plenty of room. You can completely socially distance and still have that level of input and working at the speed of creative thought. I think that's the thing that I miss, and you can't get that remotely. It's just, with grading, you have to be in there. Like, my monitor, I think it's good for viewing colors, but it's never going to be as good as what they're looking at. And when you're making small adjustments, they also are not entirely sure if I'm looking at the very same thing that they're looking at. There's little things like that.
Yeah,
and for a little production like us, we're not prepared,
I was going to say, I hadn't thought about that kind of QC element to it, because obviously editing remotely is just cuts, isn't it? But obviously, once you get down to the polishing and the sandpapering of all the rough edges to make it into the smooth film that people see, then that's about percentages, isn't it? It's not about big decisions, is it?
Yeah, that's right. And we got there, and it took a little bit longer than we thought it would.
Have you got any tips though that you could, that you began to learn that could, if someone's listening to this now who's because we're still in the pandemic as we record this, have got the prospect of remote post-production to come? Any tips that you could pass on that could make someone's life easier?
I guess the biggest thing is, and it's probably quite an obvious thing now, we didn't think about it because we didn't think the world was going to be in the state that it was when we went into post.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone could have predicted it when we were shooting the film. Plan for the eventuality. Don't think that necessarily the production process is going to be exactly the way that it is. So make sure that there are options to do things remotely in the best possible way. We couldn't do that to a degree because it, to be honest, took us by surprise. But there are things that you can do. Certainly the facilities you use, make sure that we were grading in a place that simply wasn't big enough for myself, the cinematographer, and the grader to all sit together in a safe way. But some facilities do have that, so you can budget and you can make sure that your facilities are future-proof. But also, I think we were very lucky because the post people were just so good. And I'd worked with them before, which I think if this process had been with, I'd worked with, is in fact the same grader who did Soror, who's fantastic, Jason Moffat, just such a great colorist. And he sort of knows the aesthetics that myself and my cinematographer like. And you can really trust him to sort of get along with things where you're not there. The same with the sound designer. I'd worked with him many times, and the sound mixer. So they knew I had certain quirks of things that I like. I don't know if it's and it's a strange filmmaker to reference when you compare it to something like Sorority, but man, I was a huge John Woo fan back in the day. Like, I was obsessed with Hong Kong cinema, and it means nearly in most of my films, if anyone closes a door or walks past the camera, there has to be like a slight, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You watch Hard Boiled, and I love this because I saw your picks, your 26 film picks, and I was pleased to see Hard Boiled on there. You watch that, and it's just everything's like. And I love it. Like if you watch the party scene in Sorority, as people walking past the camera, you hear there's a shot of Sophie Kennedy Clark closing the door. It's all just John Woo swooshes.
Well, I was going to say it's interesting you bring that up because my next question was going to be about for what could have easily been a no budget straight drama. You've allowed yourself some stylish flourishes that sort of give it a cinematic edge over many a low budget film that that comes across Britflicks' desk, as it were. I mean, I'm thinking of the sort of lovely sort of freezing on Emily character while everything else is going wrong, while she's obviously contemplating her existential crisis, or even just introducing the idea of the journal and the narrative. The externalizing of her thoughts and stuff is a brave move in terms of creatively trying to get across the dilemma at the heart of these two sisters.
And it happens quite late in the film, like to introduce it, like it's 25 minutes in, and all of a sudden there's a voiceover. And it was something we discussed before we made the film. Did we need voiceover at the beginning to sort of lure people in? But I quite like it when films just do random things like that. No,
I was going to say I was about to say yes, because I enjoyed the smattering of it. I mean, I hadn't really picked up the John Woo thing, but now you've told me I can see it. But it was kind of, I just was admiring what you'd done with the party, the way you'd constructed the party sequence, and then I think if I remember rightly, it culminates on that kind of, it's her on her own, but obviously surrounded by people. So that idea of being lonely, even though you're surrounded by others.
There can be a danger with making these kinds of films where stuff's, I love a good kitchen sink drama, but occasionally it can get stylistically bland, where it's more about just filming what happens. And I wanted to meet in the middle. I wanted to sort of have the level of realism, but then also a bit of, a stylistic edge to sort of enhance that. Back when I made a short film, Driftwood, I guess I was sort of experimenting with that style on that film. And I worked with the actor Neil Maskell, wonderful actor, learned a lot collaborating with him. And he said to me, I know what your style is, James. And I was like, all right, what is it? And he said, and you need to be very careful because you can get it wrong. You got to make sure you get the balance between the two right. He said, it's stylized realism. And I was like, oh, I like that. That sounds kind of cool and kind of pretentious, so I'll embrace that. And I guess that, and he's completely right about my approach, but also the dangers with it. So you've got to make sure that you just sort of get that balance right.
Your decision when you want to turn it up to 11 in terms of a stylistic flourish, if it's too surprising, can be like, what you're doing. I mean, I think, I don't know if you've seen Pincushion, but Deborah Haywood does this successfully too, where you have ostensibly a very realist drama about a young girl getting bullied at school and her depressed, clinically depressed mother. But then it just cuts to complete, almost like fantasy imagine sequences where what's happening isn't real at all, but it's illustrating what's maybe going on in the character's mind, or trying to convey a sense of mood at that point before we go into something a lot harder or something. And I think it's because you are making a film, you're not making a documentary, which I think it's often forgotten that you are allowed to take some chances. You are allowed to do something. You're allowed to do something that is interesting to you, not just because if it's interesting to you to do, then obviously the viewer gets the treat. The fact that I'm drawing attention to it is testimony that it certainly is me as one anecdotal evidence of an audience as kind of noticed above what was a really interesting story of siblings. There was those cinematic moments that enabled me, the viewer, to do some work. I think the expression would be, you're not just giving it me all on a plate.
Because it's not quite a lot of those moments they're not really based in reality either. We sort of up to that point, it's been very sort of matter of fact, and what you see is what you see, and the relationships and the drama in those moments, it's captured in that way. And then as soon as Emily Haig's character, Sarah, sort of opens her journal, you almost see not an alternate reality, but you see sort of a visual representation of what's going through her mind as she writes those words. And yeah, it sort of starts in that party scene. And, I think during, after I'd written the script, and you're sort of visualizing moments as you write it, but there is sort of that moment after a script's written where you just sit down and you think, right, how will I visually get across some of this stuff? And, I was a little bit concerned. I was like, there is a little bit of a switch here. But I think that's kind of, and I realized that's why I wanted to do it in the first place. I was interested in sort of sucking the viewers into her mind at that moment, and that very sort of clear visual change it felt right. It's a risk. But I think you've got to take risks sometimes.
No. As a way of moving your narrative forward, and maybe this speaks to the amount the genre films I've watched in my life. It got me thinking as to where's he going now, and I kind of I went to some dark places where I thought you might be taking us at certain points, and that was good because again it's that idea of making me work. It wasn't just everything happening didn't happen as like just unfolding a packed box, and there it is. The box is now a flat piece of cardboard. Well, that was inevitable, wasn't it? So yes, that was nice. The way that you're able to use those stylist touches, but for me, and again, I can only talk for me as anecdotal evidence, and I'm kind of talking in vague terms because I don't want to be Peter spoiler here or anything. But it got me thinking of it gave me a red herring at certain points. As much as it was interesting to look at, I started thinking, oh, will we go in there? Is this what this means? And don't worry, James, I'll tell you this when we record's off. For the listener, I won't spoil the film.
I've always been like a fan of sort of questions in films. And it's something I guess I've played around with my shorts, and not to spoon feed everything. There are some questions there, and I think it helps engage the audience. Of course, occasionally, it does end up with some sort of funny. We had one guy who spoke to me after a screening of the short film. Yeah. And said he was like, it's really great to see a really nice, positive lesbian drama. And I was like, I sort of laughed. I was like, lesbian drama. And I was saying, you've confused my film with another film you've seen. I said, no, mine was the one about the sisters. And he went, yeah, the because they get into bed together at the beginning. And I was like, no, that's sisters. There was like they say they're sisters. it's not that kind of relationship. And but it was just interesting that they just jumped to that conclusion because of that.
But that's kind of that was an early assumption that I made in the opening scene. I was thinking, okay, what's going on here?
My mum did the same, actually. Like, she said to me, I thought they were lesbians at the beginning. I was like, no, just sisters.
Well, of course, and that makes sense. But also, it would make sense if they were lovers as well. So it's kind of like it's a grey line, and the fact that you clarify it without hitting a nail on the head subsequently, it's sort of clearly the first scene you see her with Mr. Gittins is it's clear that they're not lesbian lovers. One last question for you. Having made this feature and you've talked us through a few examples and stuff. What's a kind of favourite memory you're gonna cherish from shooting this movie? Maybe it was the adverse moment that you had your little victory over. Maybe it was just a good day on set that day. Anything particular that stands out for you?
Oh, there are so many. It almost sounds kind of sugary and a bit kind of sappy, but
I'm inviting it, James. I'm inviting that.
Well, prepare yourself, because I always believed that making the first film would be like a real struggle, especially on a micro budget. I'd spoken to friends and they were like, oh, get ready, no sleep. Everyone's going to be cold and hungry. And you're almost sort of geared up to make your film at any cost. And I was really disappointed when we actually had a really, really good time. Like, even like some of the scenes in the film, which are, pretty emotional and pretty intense, we'd often, have a good laugh afterwards. And it was a really great atmosphere on set. Like, the cast were brilliant. And the crew were really great and put so much hard work in. And I think hopefully it shows in the film, certainly with the actors, that we were genuinely having a good time. I think out of many, many great moments, I think it was probably we did a day filming in Dorset on a beach, which is the beach I used to visit as a boy. Okay. And I think in the back of my head, I always were like, I'd love to shoot a scene here one day. In kind of almost like in a personal kind of way, but I think it's a beautiful area, Hengistbury Head. It's between Christchurch and Bournemouth. We went down there and we had all the crew and we set up, all the DIT and, makeup stations in the local cafe. And, that's somewhere I used to go with my family. And usually on a Sunday, we used to go down there quite a lot and walk. So it was a nice circle to be back there. And I think the weather had been really bad. The previous day it was dreadful, and the day after we filmed it was dreadful. So I was almost prepared because Kate Dickie was there. We couldn't really get her to come back again and reshoot it. So rain or shine, we were going to shoot some scenes there regardless. We may have had to make some changes if it was a gale force winds and loads of rain. But it was the most beautiful day, and it was quite warm. I think even some of the crew got like sunburn afterwards. So we were very lucky. And I think there was a scene, we were shooting a scene with Kate and Sophie Kennedy-Clark, and they were so wonderful in this scene, And I was just behind the monitor with this. It was so bright, I had to have like a black, cloth draped over the monitor in my head, so I could actually see the monitor. And it was quite a weird personal space to be in. I had all this crew around me, but I was under there by myself. And I think after a take, I did have a slight moment where I was like, this is cool. Mm-hmm. Like, it's a cool circle, coming back. I'm from Bournemouth originally. I've lived in London for years though. And sort of coming back to the old stomping ground with a crew and, some wonderful actors, making a film I really care about was really special. So I think
I hope you thank the film gods for blessing you that day.
Yeah, I think a few days later we were filming the scenes in the woods and it rained torrentially. So I think we saved up some goodwill on that day only for it to come back in spades later on. But that was a manageable situation, and it didn't impede us too much. Just got us a bit wet. But I was so pleased that day, and I think Lorenzo shot it so beautifully, like moments where they're walking through the grass, and if it had been a different kind of day, we wouldn't have been able to capture it in that way. And it's one of my favorite moments in the film, that I'm really proud of everyone's work.
No, for sure. Well, look, it just gives me to say congratulations on your first feature film, Sorority. There will be links in the show notes to how and when people can see the feature. So depending on when you listen to this, check in to see what it's saying on that day. Hopefully that'll coincide with when it's freely available to download or stream or whatever. But it just leaves me to say thank you very much for giving us your time on the Britflicks podcast.
No, thank you. Wonderful to chat.